guys, I'm out in the shed and I've been promising this one. I'm going to do a little bit of a video on doing up an old rod. I used to make custom rods many years ago and I haven't done it for like, I don't know, 30 years. Anyway, I still had all the gear here. It's sitting around in boxes with all my guides and reel seats and God knows, so much stuff that's just laying around, and a lot of old rods that need a rebuild. So I decided, well, I don't want to throw these beautiful old rods out, and some of them are quite nice and were really good blanks in their days, still work fine, but they just need a bit of a refit. So the one on the bench today is a old Power Rod actually, and I don't even know if Power Rod is still going. I think Wilson's Tackle might be making the blanks or something to do with it. I'm not quite sure. I haven't been in the sort of involved in making rods for a long time, so I'm going to have to play catch up on finding all this gear. This one's an MT7162. If you have a look at that, I think you just still see the old writing on it they put on it like 35 years ago. Yeah, Strike Zone Custom Rods was the business name back those days. And yes, an old Power Rod. It's got a chevron pattern I did on there, and that's still holding together all right. And I'm not going to change any of that. I'm just going to keep all that just for nostalgia. And I am going to just do new guides and give it a bit of a refit. Now I've taken the stripper guide off already, and that was probably too small for the rod. Probably a bit of a miscalculation when I first built it. With a 600 Alvi it worked pretty well. 650 it was used to it gets a bit of line slap, so that's where the line actually hits on the blank as you're casting. So I'm going to do some alterations to the guide placement and some new guides. Although these ones held together pretty well. These were under a pretty cheap guide in the day. These are a pretty cheap guide in the day, so an old style, but they're still holding together, funny enough. But I am going to refit it with Fuji guides, which are probably the best you can get. You can see on there that the binding is starting to get moisture and a bit of rust on the guide feet. So I'm going to strip all that binding off and put new guides all the way up. Probably 7, I'd say, and a new tip. And yeah. So anyway, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on how that's done. So on how to do that. Some little brief tips on how to do that. I'm not going to bore you to tears stripping every, the whole process in one video. It'll take forever. Anyway, I'll get into it and show you a couple of tricks. Oh, first things first is a simple little tool. This is a scalpel, right? So this is a fairly good one I bought. You need a sharp scalpel. You can use probably a standing knife or something like that if you really wanted to. But I find the scalpel's probably easier to hold and easier to use. And the first thing we do is try and lift this binding off, get this binding off. Luckily, the old clear coat on it is pretty old, so it seems to strip off fairly easily. But the main part is trying to cut underneath that. It just, I hope you can see that, but just underneath the foot of the guide, and start there and start cutting that off. So you don't want to cut into the blank because that'll be bad. I'll just put a, put a weak spot in your blank. So we're going to just nick this under here and get that without cutting your fingers. Get that to come off very cautiously. Now you can see this binding starting to rot, And I hope you can see it. It's hard to film this, but anyway. The key part is getting that old binding off. And what we really want to do is get it started. This stuff's not too bad because you should be able to lift it without doing too much damage. Now all the rods I made were all underbound underneath the guide feet, just to protect the guides from going into the blanks. Now you can see that I've just got this piece of thread already out. So what I'm going to do there, and then start to unwind that. And as it comes off, that takes the binding off. I don't knock the camera around too much. And there you go. I'm not sure if that's a bit better to see it as I strip that off. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to see. There you go. That's one side stripped off. And then the trick is to do exactly the same to the other side. Hopefully you can see that. Hopefully you can see that. That's got a lot of clear underneath that. So we just have to go just at the base of the feet without, we don't want to be cutting into the blank. Just got to get that started and start to pull it off. You can see the rust has gone under there from the guide feet. There we go. Once you get it started, it's fairly easy to then roll it off. I'll give you a quick rundown as well. I'm in the middle of taking that guide off, but this is a rod binding lathe. It's specifically for doing binding. I bought this again, you know, this is probably 35 years old, something like that. They are still available and they're pretty much the same as this one. Now I'm just going to unhook that belt off the motors. So it's got motors, there's a drying motor in there. It's a bit rusty and old looking, but it's had it's been around for a while, just so I can free spin that a bit easier when I'm taking the binding off. There's two motors on there. That one there's for drying, so you hook that on at just a slow speed, so when after you've finished putting new guides on, you can then put the clear coats on. That'll keep spinning so the clear coat doesn't actually run. I'll show you that when I get to that stage. And the other motor here is a sewing machine motor basically, and it's got a foot control on it for when you're doing the binding, so you can actually feed it on and operate the lathe at the same time to whatever speed you like, they're comfortable with to do the binding. That's a quick rundown, I'll show you that later. Anyway, back to stripping this thing off. So we'll just go, that's a lot easier now. We just quickly speeds up the process a bit. I'll probably fast forward on some of this so you don't have to sit through the whole lot. You can see it fairly quickly. So there you can see it just comes off once you get it started. Just peel it off. It will break and every now and again, but that's alright. There you go. That one's off. That should come off now. There's the guide. I hope you can see it. There's a guide. So actually it's not in too bad a condition considering it's been on there for a lot of years. The guide's in not bad nick. So anyway, that's gone. Now we have to get started on the underbinding. Now this is where you've got to be a little bit more careful because the underbinding is right on the rod, so it is much closer to the rod, so pick a spot to find it. I'll try and get some of the clear off without doing any damage. Again, this stuff is really old, so you find it comes off fairly easily. Chip it off. Now we just want to get underneath that bit of thread. So I want to get that, get an end to start it. So I'm just going to get underneath that bit of thread, chop it off, and get it started, hopefully. There you go, get that started. Now we can just pull it. We don't pull the rod out, Frank. Don't pull the rod out of the rod, the clamps. And yes, it broke on me. Get it started and you can roll it off. There you go. Peel that last bit off. Get rid of this. There you go. Cleaned off. Now I'll just clean that up with a bit of acetone. And that's pretty much it. Now I'm just going to clean that up a bit. You know, there's a bit of residue on there. I've just got some acetone. You know, stuff you buy at Bunnings basically, you know, a bit of acetone. Acetone. Remember, all this stuff is flammable, so don't go having matches or ignition sources around it, of course. But I'm sure you're all bright enough to know that. So I'm just going to wipe over that section of the rod where the old binding was. Clean off any residue that's on there. Because I give the rod a good clean before I rebind it. I'm not going to polish it or do anything crazy because I really don't think the polish is going to would be too good when you try to put a clear coat on it. You want a nice clean surface with no contaminants underneath it. Well, that looks pretty good. A bit of a scrub where that old binding was. This is where the rod lathe really is a really good piece of kit when you try and do this stuff. You can buy these rod lathes, the rod lathes from suppliers. There's a few guys. I'll leave some links down in the comments for different suppliers around the place that you can buy this stuff from. It's not as readily available, I should say. Plus all the components, they sell all the components to make rods. So if you want to get into making rods, it's good fun. And you know, if you're a bit of a hobbyist, it's a good thing to do. You do a whole lot of decorative binding, which I'll show you some books about that later. Anyway, that's nice and clean. Doesn't look too bad. Come up alright. And I'll keep going and strip the rest off and show you how to put them back on later. Here I am back out in the shed. Yes, going to do a little bit more on the fishing rod build. It's not something you do sort of all at once, and you know, it takes a little while, and it's fitted in between other jobs. But all the guides have been stripped off. As you can see, she's now, I know, hopefully it's a long rod, this one. It's 13.5 foot, so she takes up a fair bit of space on the bench. And all the guides are stripped off, as you can see, and now I've just got to get the tip off. So that's still on there. So I'm going to replace that tip. All I'm going to do is put a little bit of heat on it. I'll use a heat gun and apply a little bit of heat and a little twist, and it should come off with a bit of luck. And then, yeah, keep going. This is probably going to be a little bit hard to record on film, but I'm going to give it a go. I'm just going to put a little bit of heat on that, just not much. It's going to be a bit noisy with the gun, of course. I'm just going to put some light heat on the tip itself. You don't want to be overdoing this because it's fiberglass, and so the fiberglass will actually, you know, deteriorate with the heat, and you know, so we just want to try and get a little bit of heat in that guide, and then I'll get a bit of pliers. And you can't, you know, the tip's going to be hot, so you know, you don't want to grab with your fingers and try and twist it. I've got a pair of pliers ready, just so I can get hold of it and give it a bit of a twist. So anyway, we'll apply a bit of heat and see how we go. Give that a go because I can see the guide starting to melt, so we just want to get it loose. It's bloody on there nice and tight, that's for sure. I don't know if you can see that, but she's kind of moving, but still not enough, I don't think. Maybe a little bit more underneath. That is a really hot gun, so you got to be a bit careful with it. There you go, off she comes. So as I said, you want to go crazy with the heat, and that heat gun, though it's only a cheap one, but it gets hot real fast. So there you go, guides off, the tip's off, and you can see the tip's now had it because it melted the plastics around the ceramic interior of the tip. So anyway, that's gone and it's hot, so we'll get rid of that. Now I'll clean that up. Get my scalpel and see if I can get some of that stuff off. Oh, it's nice and hot. Seems to be coming up all right. I don't want to cut into the blank. I want to weaken the tip. Well, it's come off quite well actually. Clean that up with a bit of wet and dry or something, a little bit of sandpaper won't hurt it. And you've got to do this delicately because you don't want to actually cut into the fiberglass. You just want to take the little bit of residue off. Clean up. There you go. Clean enough for the time being. That's clean enough. Now, get rid of that heat gun. So she's out of the way. And the next step will be to just get a measurement on that so I can get the right size. I'm going to put a number 10 tip on that. But I just need the diameter of the blank itself so I can get the right internal diameter of the tip, because there's all varying ones. So you can get a number 8 tip, but it could have a 2.3 mil internal diameter on the tip, or it could have a 3 mil internal diameter. Number 10s are the same, so the tip has, I wish I could show you this somewhere. Let's grab one out. So there you go. If you can see that, that's a Fuji tip. And it is a number 8, but it's only got a 2.6 mil internal diameter. So the internal diameter of where you slip it on the end of the where you slip it onto the end of the blank is 2.6 mil. So you have to have the right size diameter, or otherwise you've got to mess around. You don't want to be trimming them down. You want to be building them up. So if you can't find one that fits exactly, you better go up. It's better off going up a size and putting some binding underneath it to pack it out. That seems to work better. Anyway, I'll get a measurement of that so I can get the right tip. So anyway, got the calipers out, and I will just do a little quick measure on that, see what it comes up as. So I don't know if you can see that. It's about 3.1. So if we get hold of a 3.2, it should fit fairly well. So I need probably a 3.2 just to get down far enough, of course. 3.2, it should fit it really well. So I want a number 10 with a 3.2 internal diameter to fit on that blank. Now you don't need calipers to actually, you know, be that accurate with it. You could probably do it with a ruler and a good set of eyes. But anyway, caliper makes life easy, especially with digital ones. Anyway, that's that part done. I'll go and chase down a decent tip for it, a good tip at the right size, and yeah, show you how to stick that on. So here I am, I'm back out in the shed again and continuing with the rod build. So I'm sort of fitting it in bits and pieces all over the place to get it done. It'd be great if you have the time to sit there and just do it all day, but I don't. So in between other things, I come out and do a bit. Where am I up to? I've just got to stick the tip on first. So I've got to actually araldite the tip onto the blank. It is cleaned down. All the runners are off. It's had a bit of a wipe down with some acetone. And ready to rock and roll. So just a little bit more about this blank. I don't know if you can see that, but she is an MT7162. So I can't remember what the MT stands for. I don't know if it's a multi-taper or something along those lines, but 7 wraps. So it's 7 wraps of fiberglass, and it's 162 inches long, which I think is 13.5 foot. So it's a big rod, heavy rod too. 7 wraps. It's built for, you know, it's the old tailor fishing blanks, jewfish, heavy surf gear. For an Alvy. Now what am I going to do? Well, the key part of this job is to line up the reel seat with the tip. So on the rod lathe it's not too bad. I don't try to trip over everything, but if I look down the blank, she's got a bit of a twist in the tip, but that's alright. That's alright. And what I've got to do now is actually align the reel seat up with the tip is what I need to do. So I need to have the tip of the tip lined up the reel seat. And the best way to do that is just have that reel seat setting up in the rod lathe so it sits nice and level, and I can just glue that on the top. And then once it's lined up and stuck on, I'll just roll it around so the weight of the tip doesn't turn it, and it'll just be hanging towards the ground, if that makes any sense. But you'll see what I mean when I get there. Anyway, I don't have to find the backbone of this rod. It's already been found years ago. So all I got to do is stick that tip on. So I got to stir up a bit of araldite. I use a 5-minute araldite, which works great. The tips I've put on, I've held on for years, and they're all put on with 5-minute araldite. So that'll be fine. Anyway, I'll get some araldite mixed up. You only need a little tiny bit, so I need a little fraction of araldite. I'll show you. Alrighty, so I'm just going to mix up a little bit of araldite. I need these old fast food container lids. They're great for doing this. Nice flat surface, and it's a good way just to use them rather than just chuck them in the bin. So, araldite, equal parts. As I said, you only need you only want a little tiny bit of araldite. You don't need much. And that's pretty much it. I'd like to buy these paddle pop sticks. Use them for stirring up or stirring the clear coat sand for this type of stuff. So remember, this is 5-minute araldite, so you get 5 minutes, it starts to go off. So you've got to be reasonably efficient at this. it's not going to last long. And the hardest part is lining that tip up. So I got that mixed up. There's the tip. Number 10, 3.2 mil inside diameter on the tip. And we're just going to put a bit of glue in that, slide it on and line it up, and she's all done. Let it go off, of course. Now just stuck a little bit in the top, paint a little bit over the blank. You'll have heaps left over. As I said, you do not need a lot, but it's hard to get any less than that out of that Araldite dispenser. So get rid of that, and all we're going to do is push that on basically. Because it's a nice tight fit, I don't have to put any binding underneath it. And now I will just check that from the base to make sure it's lined up, or from the reel seat. Because we want that to line up pretty well with the reel seat, so when you actually stick the reel on, everything lines up. The guides all should line up perfectly with the tip from the reel seat to the tip. If that makes sense. But we'll show you that a little bit later as well when we start putting all the guides on. There you go, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go down and just make sure I've got that lined up. And you've got a little bit of a bend in that end of that blank. That's all right. We can work with that. That looks pretty good actually. It's hard to tell at this distance, I must admit. But if the reel seat's sitting vertical and everything's pretty level, it shouldn't be too hard to line all that up. It should be good at the tip. Anyway, back down, just give that a quick check. Make sure I've got that as close as I can. I reckon that's just a little bit more. Just give that a quick check. Anyways, I think that is pretty good. That is pretty good. So what I'll get now is just a bit of rag, clean off the excess glue. Yeah, that's already starting to go off. I might just get a bit of acetone to clean that up. I just want to take excess glue off it, so I'll just clean that all up with a bit of acetone. There's no residue on there. And that's pretty much it. Tips on. Next part of the story is putting the guides on, and doing that I will just organise my spacings, which I'll get into next time when I start to do that job. And I will actually just use masking tape to hold those on, and then I'll put a reel on and check how the line flows through over the blank to see if it's all good before I start binding. Once I get that measurements are all correct for the guides, I can then bind all the guides on. Anyway, keep going. Yeah, back again, back in the shed again. Next step in this process of rebuilding this rod is to set the guide spacings up. So it's all stripped off, the tip's been glued on. Now I'm going to measure out the guide placements and tape them on. So I'll just use some masking tape, tape them into position. Then I'll test the rod to make sure that the line from a reel follows the guides in a nice clean, or as close as you can get to the shape of the blank in a bend when it's loaded. So when the blank loads up, you want to be able to see the line actually follow that bend in the blank. So so it's travels smoothly over all the guides and reduces friction. Anyway, here she is. Tips on and all done. Blanks all stripped, and then I'll just measure these out and I'll tape them on. Cool. Well, I'm all set up, hopefully. And what I'm going to do is start measuring out to place the guides. I'm lucky. You probably, I don't know if you can see that, but way back when I used to do this a lot, like making custom rods, I actually found the recipe for this particular plank. So that's got my guide placements already on it. Might fill with those just a touch. I do want to drop the stripper guide down a little bit more. But yeah, so it's just a matter of measuring that out. And start to mark it with a chinograph. Now I've got the blank rolled up with the reel seat sitting upwards, vertical, I suppose you'd call that. And that just makes it a bit easier to keep all the guides pretty much in line. I mean, I'll fix that up later when I actually bind them up. You can adjust them a bit. For the time being, I'm just going to measure those out and start measuring them and marking the spacings. It's not the easiest thing to do. Unfortunately, it's really hard to get a tape measure to detect. It'd be nice to have a bench with a tape measure built in. That might come later. So I'm looking for 2055, but I'm going to go to 2.1 or 2100 for that stripper guide. Now, if you're really fussy, you can get quite particular with the measurements. But it is a fishing rod, not a bit of, engineering masterpiece. So the next one we're going with at 1600 or 1600. I can get that to stay on there just for a little while. Now, just a quick chat with that pencil is I think they just call them chinograph. They're like a, if you can see that very well. I think they're for dressmaking type pencil, but they clean off easy and they don't stain, so they're quite good for this job, marking blanks. All marked. Grab the old stripper guide out, which is the big silver one. There we go. Hard to see. Typical surf rod blank. That's pretty sure that was a 70mm. It's a big guide, that one. Yep, it's a 70mm. So what I'm going to do is make sure that's sitting as vertical. That reel seat is actually pointing upwards as vertically as I can get it, and I will tape these on. I'll just do the first one and then now we don't want these on permanently, we're just trying to get them in place so we can check that all these guides are in pretty much the right spot. So all I'm doing is wrapping a bit of tape around these things. As you can see, I hope you can see that, maybe not. Anyway, I'll show you in a minute if you can't see that. I'll just move that down out of the way a bit. Now, I've just got to find the right guide. That's a Fuji. And I'm using all Fujis this time on this rod. That's number 30, BCL SV OG 30S. I forget what it all means, but Fuji guys have a whole lot of different types of guides. I don't know if that's a silicon. I can't remember, but they're all good guides. Not the cheapest guides in the world to buy, especially if you buy them from a tackle shop. These all came from BCF. And the other important part is to make sure you're putting those on the right way. So you've got the V legs at the front and the single leg at the back. Oh, I had pointing towards the tip. So this one, which is the V pattern, will be at the front, and that single leg will be at the back. It's a shame a lot of this stuff isn't done so much anymore. I don't see a lot. I mean, if you go online, you'll find lots of rod building information from the States. It seems to be more popular. I don't see a lot of rod building stuff on like YouTube and wherever in Australia, which is a bit unfortunate because it's quite a bit of a craft, and the actual binding and binding patterns are a real craft. They are real. So there's been some, one of the probably more famous rod builders in this country was Ian Miller. Ian's still around somewhere, I think. He's working for one big, large tackle, manufacturers now. But he was one of the best in the country. There was a lot of other guys around. I can't remember their names back in the day. And it was, in the earlier years of sports fishing in Australia, I suppose, back in the 70s, 80s, 80s, I think 80s, 90s. It was a real thing, but it was very difficult to get components back then. Anyway, I'll keep going. So we got a stripper, and I'll get back to you when I've taped all these out on and show you the different sizes. So there you go. I've just put the runners on the blank temporarily. with some masking tape so I can test the that the line will follow the curve of the loaded rod. I'll show you that later. I'll probably need somebody to hold a camera and do when I do that, because I won't be able to do it myself. So I might have to watch the boss lady comes home or get her to give me a hand. Just recapping on rod builders back in the 80s. I think it must have been the 80s. But anyway, Gary Howard's still going. Gary Howard is a local guy. I think he's at Redcliffe still. He's been making rods from way back then. He's still making beautiful, beautiful rod, beautiful surf rods. There's not too many other guys I know around the place that do it. Wilson's, of course, have their own rod manufacturing, but you know, smaller people or independent type people. Gary Howard's sort of got a fairly decent sized operation now. I'd love to have a look at how he does it. His factory one day, never had the chance. But Wilson's are still making rods. They make a good surf rod. I've got one here, a live fibre, which is a great surf rod. A great tailor rod, that's for sure. And so, you know, there's still got some guys making. Nice to see that manufacturing come back to the country. Most of the stuff's made overseas these days. Most of the rods you're buying are all made overseas, in Malaysia, China, wherever. And there's not seemed to be as much manufacturing in this country as there should be, which is a shame. And especially with blanks, I don't know who's making the blanks these days. I haven't been able to find out. If anybody knows, by all means, put it in a comment, because I've been a bit out of touch with this stuff for a while, and it's kind of fun getting back into it. But anyway, what I'm doing now is I've bound that on. I'm going to pull out the reel, the Alvi, a 650 C5, which is the big drag Alvi. So I want to match this up to a 650 for heavy work, surf work. It is a 7 wraps of glass on this rod, so it's quite heavy. Still in good nick. Now we'll get to this point. I'm going to the next stage. I've got to take it out in the backyard and test it out, and probably need some nice sunny weather to do that, so we can get some good film of it. I'll probably cut this video off here and then do a second one, because it's going to start to get too long. Again, you know, there's a fair bit in these things, so you know, and this is not really detailed, but you probably get a lot more detailed than this. But after I've tested this, make sure that these guides are placed right, I will then go about binding them on and putting a clear coat over the top of the binding and finishing the rod off. I'm lucky I had the recipe for this blank, the record of it, handwritten of course in those days. Look at that. You know, we used to actually hand write everything. So that was fantastic, digging that back out again. If you're just reel building the rod, just remember to measure. If the rod works fine and the guides are all placed in the right spot, it's all good. All you got to do is measure the placement of those guides before you take the guides off, okay? So don't go stripping it off and go, oh no, I don't know where all those guides go. Strip it off, measure them all out, write them down so you know exactly where they go back on, then you can bind them back on later in the same spot. So if you're fixing up an old rod, measure the guides from the tip down, and then make sure you keep those measurements. Then when you go to put new guides back on, you can just, you know, put those on in exactly the same place as they used to be. All right. So as I said, next step, get this out, test it a bit, so that the line follows the curve of the loaded rod, the shape of the loaded rod, and yeah, and then we'll get around to binding them all on. So here we are, we're down to the last stage, guys. We've just got to check the guide placement to make sure that the line runs over it nice and evenly, and it follows the load of the rod. So it follows the shape of the rod under load, and there's not huge angles on the line at each guide that would create extra friction. All right, so if my wonderful camera girl there can take a shot, a slow-mo of the rod under load. There you go, and that, it looks pretty good actually. I'm pretty happy with that. So next stage we'll be binding the guides on, and yeah, that's a pretty lengthy process. So this video's got a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, hope you guys are patient and watch through it. Anyway, don't forget, like, subscribe. Definitely need subscribers, so we need lots of subscribers. That would be great, and that keeps my energy up to keep doing videos. So don't forget, like and subscribe, and there'll be a part 2 that will show you all the bonding techniques to get this thing bound up and looking magnificent, and how to revive an old rod. All right, don't throw them out, rebuild them, make them new again. Anyway, cheers guys, see you next time.